Hey guys, hope you're having a good day. I am finishing out our Ruth devotional series for this week, and I will be in Ruth 4, the last chapter of Ruth. I'm so glad that we've been going through the book of Ruth this week because it's one of my favorite books of the Bible personally. It's such a wonderful, beautiful picture of redemption. And really we get to see the culmination of that, the climax of that in Ruth 4. And so go ahead and flip there if you have your Bible in front of you. And we're just going to dive right in. If you haven't noticed, Ruth really reads like this beautiful, wonderful story with all the highs and the lows, tragedy, redemption, wonderful characters that you grow to love. And really, Ruth 4 is kind of, spoiler alert, like the happy ending of the book of Ruth. And so just kind of painting it in that light, I want us to look at Ruth 4 in kind of two main sections, and it's broken up naturally this way. But just a reminder where we left off yesterday, what Madeline was sharing is the scene where Ruth has approached Boaz and asked him, "Will you redeem me and my family? Will you help us?" And essentially what happens is Boaz tells her, "I want to, but there is someone else who is closer in relation to you who technically has the legal right to do that himself." And so he tells Ruth, "I promise you that I will go and ask him if he will tomorrow. And if he won't, then I will redeem you myself." So again, we see the character of Boaz as just a God-fearing, obedient, faithful man of God. So that's where we have left off. And we see Ruth again kind of in a, interesting situation of waiting to see what's going to happen. Her patience is probably been put into practice many times at this point, and she is waiting to see what will happen with Boaz and this discussion that he's going to have with the kinsman redeemer. So that's where we pick up in Ruth 4. Boaz has gone up to the city gate, which functions kind of like a town hall, where things like, legal proceedings and discussions and just any sort of like large gathering or something where there needs to be witnesses present, it all happens here at the city gate. So just think of it that way. And Boaz goes and finds the Redeemer that he's talking about, who doesn't even have a name in the book of Ruth, and asks him, "Will you redeem this land and take Ruth as your wife? Because you technically have the legal right to all that is in Ruth and Naomi's family, and you have the right to marry Ruth." And this man tells him, and we can read here, and even in verse 6, says, "Then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it." And so basically what he's saying is, I don't want to spread out my inheritance to a new wife and children, on top of my other wife and children. I don't want that to affect their inheritance. So he says, I don't want to do that. I give you the right to do it. And of course, what does Boaz do? In verses 7 through 10, we see that he swears in front of the town elders and the crowd of people that have gathered at the city gate. He swears in front of all of them, "I will redeem this family and marry Ruth." And so it's kind of a, yay moment that happens while you're reading it. And all the people in verses 11 through 12 even tell him, they bless him and are excited for him and say, "We are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together built up the house of Israel." So they're blessing him and saying, God bless you for your faithfulness. And this woman who they've all heard about, who they've heard about what a wonderful woman she is at this point. And they're blessing him and saying, "We hope that you have many children and that your lineage is established." And so that's exactly what happens. In verse 13, we can read that Boaz marries Ruth and they have a son. So it's kind of the first happy ending here, where Boaz and Ruth have a son. And not only that, but Naomi, who is kind of, the first in this family, the oldest here, her lack of sons and her kind of losing her husband, all of that has been redeemed in this one baby who is named Obed. And basically, we can see that Naomi is blessed by this child. Not only is Ruth blessed, and we can see both of them, both Ruth and Naomi, finally get to rest after all of their kind of toil and hard work and trial that they've been through, and truly just suffering they've experienced. But this baby establishes and continues on Naomi's family. And it says in verse, in verse 16, it says, "Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse." So Naomi even looks after this baby. I want us to see the second kind of happy ending here. And we read it in verse 17. "And the women of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, 'A son has been born to Naomi.' They named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David." And I know we've kind of touched on this in other devotionals from this week in Ruth, but really, what an incredible thing we get to see the Lord doing, establishing the line of David, bringing in a Moabite woman, Ruth, into the line that will eventually result in King David. God is using, kind of unexpected people in this future dynasty in the line of David. And it's just so cool to me that the first book after Ruth is 1 Samuel. So we can read, I think it's 16 chapters into 1 Samuel, we see David for the first time. So Naomi is essentially King David's great-great-grandmother. And what a blessing it is, because even thinking about Ruth, who lost her husband and had no children, really was kind of one of the worst off you could be in that day. A woman with no husband or children, she went from being a kind of a maidservant, a slave servant, to being a wife of Boaz and functioning as the parents of Obed, and then Obed would become the parents of Jesse, and then we read that Jesse is David's father. It's just so cool and wonderful and beautiful that God would choose to use Ruth in the line of David. And I really think ultimately we could kind of end it there and say, what a happy ending in Ruth. It kind of points us to King David, but ultimately, who does David point us to? Who comes from the dynasty of King David? We read on later on in 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel, and we know as believers, if you know anything about David, you know that the best man, the most wonderful king and savior comes from the line of David and Jesus Christ. And that is our final kind of happy ending here in the book of Ruth. Ruth ultimately paints a picture, kind of a small picture, of a glimpse into the line of people that would ultimately result in Jesus. And that should encourage us in so many ways. But kind of one of the main things we can take away from that is God is at work in even the darkest, hardest times of your life and suffering. Look at Naomi and Ruth and how the book of Ruth started. And look how it ends, talking about the line of David and how ultimately the Messiah would be born through that line. And he would become the true king, the risen King. And so just want to encourage you that not only, can we rejoice in who Jesus is as our King, but we can be encouraged that God is at work, even in the hardest of circumstances. I mean, there were, 4 generations until King David even came around. Sometimes it takes a really long time for us to see what God is doing. Sometimes you don't even see at all what God is up to in our lives. We may never know something that happened in our lives, or something that, you have questions about. There's a chance that God, won't even reveal that in your lifetime here. But we can trust him, and that he is at work, that he is faithful. And as much as we see the kindness, boldness, courage, faithfulness of people like Ruth and Boaz, should ultimately point us to the perfect one in all of those ways, in Jesus, the Son of God. And so I just want to leave that here with y'all, and just encourage you to continue on in 1 Samuel. If you want to, this weekend, dive into 1 Samuel and really continue on in the story. And yeah, that's all I have for you. I hope you're having a really good day. And we miss y'all so much, and can't wait for the day that we get to see you in person. Just know that we're praying for you. And if you want to reach out to us about anything specifically for prayer, or just to talk or hang out, let us know. And yeah, we miss y'all. We'll see you soon.